Vanessa, let's come back to you then. And, Yemen.
Yep. So let's have a look at an article in the New York Times, which basically confirms everything that I reported last week on UK Column News. Reference Trump's sudden ceasefire with the Yemenis. So this is a New York Times article from yesterday. Why did Trump suddenly backpedal on the war against Ansarullah in Yemen? So from the article itself, in the first 30 days, Ansarullah, they actually, of course, said the Houthis, but I've amended that, shot down 7 American MQ-9 drones, 30 million each, hampering Central Command's ability to track and strike the group. Several US F-16s and an F-35 fighter jet were nearly struck by the Yemeni air defense, making real the possibility of American casualties. And of course, we shouldn't forget the drama of the leaked WhatsApp conversation, which apparently, according to the article, put the lives of US military and particularly pilots at risk. And then, of course, there was a huge US deployment to effectively support Israel, both sustaining the genocide of Palestinians and preventing the prevention of the genocide by the Yemenis. 2 aircraft carriers, additional B-2 bombers, which, of course, are nuclear capable, and fighter jets, as well as Patriot and THAAD air defense, were sent to the Middle East. But in fact, the article admits that there was very little degradation of the Yemeni capability of hitting both US vessels in particular, but also continuing the airstrikes or the missile strikes against the occupied territories, and basically enabling not only the blockade of Israeli shipping, but also an effective no-fly zone in the Ben Gurion airport, because international airlines are still cancelling flights into Ben Gurion after the Yemenis attacked it again since the US ceasefire, which didn't incorporate Israel. The Pentagon is concerned. Again, this is something that we mentioned last week. And if we could just have that up on screen. So many precision munitions were being used, especially advanced long-range ones, that some Pentagon contingency planners were growing increasingly concerned about overall stocks and the implications if the US might have to ward off an attempted invasion of Taiwan by China. So exactly as we said, pretty much has been confirmed by the New York Times, is that Trump had no choice but to withdraw from any kind of aggression against Yemen in order to conserve stocks and prevent the loss of life and loss of equipment, which has reached over $1 billion.
Yes, amazing. Thank you, Vanessa. That was, you heard it here first, of course. So, Vanessa, let's come to you then. And of course, Trump has been in Saudi Arabia. So what has he been up to?
Apparently Trump has been arranging to meet with Jolani, the head of the Syrian junta, which of course is basically Al-Qaeda, that came to power after the international coup of December 2024. I don't know if the slides are a bit mixed up, because this one is a little bit further on, but I'll just keep going. So this is basically the first meeting of a US president with a Syrian president in 25 years. Of course, unfortunately, this is a meeting with the leader of Al-Qaeda. And we hear, of course, that Trump has had the meeting this morning in Saudi Arabia before he headed off to Qatar. And this is basically following a meeting in Damascus between a Trump, let's say, one of the Trump management, Jonathan Bass, who was reported by Syrian media to have gone to Damascus to meet with Jolani in order to lay the ground for the meeting with Trump. Jonathan Bass is someone who on his X account talks about respect for religious freedom and coexistence, without, of course, mentioning the fact that Israel itself has no respect for the coexistence with Palestinians and is currently genociding Palestinians in the occupied territories and in Gaza. Now, as a result of Bass's meeting, apparently Jolani basically agreed to give America access to oil reserves in Syria and to further and expand trade with the United States, which of course means occupation by the likes of the International Monetary Fund and overall control by the US and Israel of the Syrian economy going forward. He also promised Trump a Trump Tower to be built in the middle of Damascus. So all of these sweeteners were basically to give him the opportunity to meet with Trump. And that, in fact, led to Trump lifting the sanctions on Al-Qaeda, which had been in place, or the sanctions rather, had been in place since 1979 onwards. So let's just listen to Trump addressing the Gulf states regarding the lifting of sanctions on Syria.
And also with President Erdogan of Turkey, who called me the other day and asked for a very similar thing, among others, and friends of mine, people that I have a lot of respect for in the Middle East. I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness. Oh, what I do for the Crown Prince.
But of course, part of this deal was effectively the normalization between Syria and, or normalization of relations between Syria and Israel, which apparently has been achieved. And Trump is not lifting all the sanctions. I'm told by sources in Syria that around 30% have actually been lifted. So this seems to be a bit more of a gesture than anything else. And I don't know if we can go back to the slide from Marwa, because she basically went on her Telegram channel to talk about what has not been affected basically by Trump's grand gesture in front of Saudi Arabia in particular. And I very much paraphrased what she said. But basically, it doesn't mean an end to US illegal occupation of Syrian resources, either directly or by proxy. No end to Israeli aggression against Syria, the bombing of multiple sites across Syria since December 2024. No reversal of the Turkish theft of Aleppo industry, which began in 2011. No trade without US or Israeli approval. And of course, basically the embedding of US and EU and UK banking facilities in Syria to ensure future control. No military or defense, much of which was destroyed by Israel from December last year onwards. No unity of the Syrian minorities because we're heading towards partitioning. No end, of course, to the ethnic cleansing I think that's typo correction in the system by Jolani's gangs, because of course what they're effectively doing is normalizing Al-Qaeda as a leadership for Syria, and effectively also normalizing the ethnic cleansing programs that have been carried out by the forces under the control of Jolani. And in fact, of course, what did Trump get from Saudi Arabia in return? The biggest arms deal in history, dozens of US defense companies, so-called defense companies, providing $142 billion arms package, also reported to probably expand beyond that, including air and missile defense, air force capability, space advancement, and maritime security. And of course, we have to bear in mind that none of that would be done unless Saudi Arabia had agreed to normalize with Israel, because Israel would not allow Saudi Arabia to develop any kind of offense or serious defense capability unless it was approved by Israel and to Israel's advantage. And looking at the fact that maritime security is part of the deal, of course, that would also impact on Iran. And if we remember what Jonathan Bass also said, that he agreed with Jolani that there would be cooperation between Jolani, Syria, and the US to basically go against Iran in the future. This is all while, of course, the US is allegedly conducting negotiations with Iran. And then finally, the video shows Trump talking about the sanctions that he's very recently imposed upon Iran. So let's have a look at that.
I want to make a deal with Iran. I want to do something if it's possible. But for that to happen, it must stop sponsoring terror, halt its bloody proxy wars, and permanently and verifiably cease its pursuit of nuclear weapons. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. I don't imagine there's anybody at this table or anybody in this room that would say they can. I'm strongly urging all nations to join us in fully and totally enforcing the sanctions that I just placed on Iran, and we also place secondary sanctions, which are in certain ways even more devastating.
So secondary devastating sanctions. And as I said, all this literally a couple of days after the negotiations in Oman between Stephen Witkoff and the Iranian representatives.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. Vanessa, you were talking earlier about the breaking up of Syria. So what's the latest on Syria?
Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick catch up, but I think the slides have been misaligned. So I don't know if we can go forward to the French port deal and go past the nice pictures of President Trump and Jolani. And then I can sort of get started on what's actually happening in Syria at the moment.
Sorry,
we don't have them.
No, we're going to have to just go with it.
Okay, all right. That's a shame. We don't even have the map.
You keep talking. I'll try to work it out. Yes.
Okay, so basically, I just wanted to do a catch up on Syria and the carve up of Syrian territory, which is ongoing. First of all, in recent news, the French have renewed or extended their deal for the control of Latakia port on the coast, which of course is very close to the Russian military base in Haimamim and Tartus. The French shipping giant CMA GGM has extended its contract to a further 30 years to develop and run the port of Latakia with a view to investing 230 million euros into the port, which of course gives France control to some degree in that area again, which formerly was an Alawite protectorate under the French mandate, and to some degree brings it into competition with Russia, that is also consolidating its military presence in the same area. And then basically we've recently had talks between Turkey and Israel in Azerbaijan to ease the tensions over Syria, because we've talked about on UK column the fact that Israel has been preventing any serious expansionism from Erdogan into the depths of Syria by bombing potential military bases and air defense bases that would be under the control of the Turkish state. And then recently also the PKK has declared its dissolution and an end to the armed struggle, which in my opinion is very much about giving legitimacy to the Kurdish factions, separatists, under the control of the US, and also, of course, supported by Israel. And I just wanted to have a look at this map and then go through everything I've just said and give an idea of how Syria is heading towards partitioning. And if we can just keep the map on for a few seconds. So on the coast, although that circle should be a little bit closer to the Latakia area, you will have France and Russia potentially forming some form of protectorate, driving out the Al-Qaeda and affiliated forces and potentially bringing it under the control of Russia, with France there as a sort of buffer against Russian expansionism, I would speculate. In the south, of course, you have Israeli expansion, creating what it calls a security perimeter. You have the Druze forming a separatist movement. I'm very much simplifying things because they are a little bit more complicated than this. But Israel is eyeing up the Druze factions as a means to occupying further to the east in the south. And then that would give it access to what it is called the David Corridor, which is the blue arrow, which would take it up the eastern flank of Syria, the border with Jordan and Iraq, and give them entry into Iraq and towards the Euphrates. In the northeast, the Kurds would be given some kind of autonomous region or federal system under the auspices of the US. Turkish territory, as you can see, that they've been allowed to keep is in the blue sections in the north. They have advanced very slightly, but as I said, Israel is preventing any further expansionism from Erdogan. And with Al-Qaeda or Jolani, as long as he lasts, of course, in the green area, which end up being a relatively centralized area surrounded by competing regional powers who all have in their interest to keep Iran out of the region. So that's where we're heading. It doesn't mean that is actually going to be achieved, because there are other variables involved, of course, including the resistance and Syrian political movements that are now coming forward.
You say if for as long as Jolani lasts. I mean, what are your thoughts on, just very briefly, if Trump is meeting Jolani today, does that give him any kind of extra underpinning?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it remains to be seen what happens with the sanctions, whether they do actually enable him to flourish as a state. There is some degree of skepticism over that. And of course, he's under pressure internally from other armed factions who don't consider him to be extremist enough. So it remains to be seen whether he does stay in place for the time being, or he eventually is pushed out.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. Okay, let's just finish off